Hi everyone, Laura Becker here, detransitioner extraordinaire, and I'm joined once again by my dear friend Vincent. He is a detrans counselor. He also works with parents. So this episode is going to be a discussion specifically geared towards parents. We're going to be talking about helping teens and emerging adults from an existentialist lens and from, of course, lived experience. I went through a transition and detransition, and I went a long time through an emerging adult period until now adulthood. And Vincent also works with a lot of clients that are struggling in this process at various stages. So, Vincent, I want to just start it off by asking you, how do you define values?
Technical question. I like it. So the the distinction must be made between values and beliefs. Okay, that's the real thing, and a lot of people misunderstand that. So in acceptance and commitment therapy, we apply values as a guide. So basically, as the basis of, okay, what are you actually doing with your decisions? Where do your decisions come from? And what I find, it's really quite fascinating when you do it. It sounds like such a simple exercise, but I do a values assessment with them, and every now and then you get adults who don't really know their values, and then you get some of the trans ideating people don't really know their values either, which is really quite surprising, because you'd think if you just sit down with someone and say, okay, what are your values? They could tell you. But often they actually can't. Or they do the survey and then they're surprised by the results. So that's really interesting. I mean, from an intrinsic motivation perspective, if you don't know your values, then what are you acting on? Because if you have intrinsic motivation, that means you have intrinsic and extrinsic goals. That's all about what you're doing. That's just psychobabble for what are you doing with your life. And from the existentialist lens, we're sensitive of someone living the unlived life. And if you're just living and you don't have values, some people have beliefs, but often there are beliefs that they've adopted. And this is where we start talking about the trans ideology, because it's an entire belief system that's adopted. But values really are things about like your character, your principles, how you judge things, and the kind of judgments that you make. Things like loyalty, fairness, courage, compassion, respect's a big one. And every now and then I'll get results that I can see are incompatible with like growth. And that's quite distinct from beliefs. Beliefs are more like things about believing in God, moral behaviors, that kind of stuff that's a little bit more specific. And I would say values don't really change a lot, whereas beliefs can change overnight. Let me stop there, because otherwise I'll go on and on.
Yeah, a trans person's belief changing overnight. Yeah, at one point in time, I was thinking, and other trans and detrans people are thinking, oh, I'm a weird girl. And then you start believing, actually, I am trans and I'm a normal trans man. It wasn't. And then you start again believing, oh, I'm an abnormal woman, or whatever the belief is. That's what my kind of beliefs were. Versus values. What was I valuing that whole time? I was
Exactly.
valuing self-acceptance. I wasn't doing a good job of it, but I was valuing that. I was in pursuit of that. I was valuing a closeness with others. I was also doing a terrible job of that. Valuing love, and I didn't know it at the time, but I was valuing escapism, and I was valuing avoidance, and I was valuing fantasy. Versus now I would say I value truth, and I value reality, and I value accepting reality. And that's, I think, before we get into specific advice or guidance, I think we should really understand that the ideology of the queer theory, queering as in inverting the norm, queering
Exactly. Yeah.
is working against normal values that I think most people who are trans or queer or woke in some way, they actually have normal values, but they're inverted through the ideology. And so they think they're in pursuit of these values, but they're actually in
Exactly.
pursuit of harmful anti-human values. So I wrote out a list, and this is like a truth bomb, I think, here. So queer values weakness, right? Because you're weakening your body voluntarily. You're weakening your ability to form healthy relationships, to function in society. A healthy value.
It's fragility, and it feeds the victimology mindset. So we'll talk later about how they want you to split into identifying as a victim and separating yourself as far as possible. So this is from the sort of philosophical and political perspective of queering. They want you to be on this side so that you're not on the meritocracy side. And meritocracy is all about personal growth, self-actualization, all that stuff. So when I say meritocracy, some people might be thinking I'm automatically talking about like a capitalist system. That's not actually what I'm talking about, although that's where it ends up. But I'm talking about more of a personal paradigm of meritocracy. Like, I'm going to earn what I take, as opposed to being entitled to it. Sorry, carry on.
No, yeah, absolutely. And like I was saying, a normal value in juxtaposition to that is strength.
Exactly.
Queerness encourages you to be a victim, to that victimhood has status. And we're seeing that with the trans-abled identities, where people are intentionally self-diagnosing with all these different disabilities, and it's actually a source of pride for them. Like queer pride, there's also disabled pride, or they call it mad pride. Like, we're proud to be crazy or whatever, versus strength would be a healthy value that I think most people would aspire to, but it's actually being devalued because to be strong is to be seen as authoritarian under the ideology. To be strong is to be seen as having privilege in some sense.
Exactly. Yeah.
Another
Which can I just, because like in your intro, you went straight to Vincent as a counselor, but if anyone's listened to me before, I grew up very poor in South Africa. I saw all sorts of terrible things in the apartheid South Africa, and then later on in the crime-ridden South Africa. And I had anorexia for 7 years. I was technically an alcoholic twice in my life, before and after anorexia, which still trying to work that out, what that's all about. But I'm just giving that little bit of background because when you and I are talking about these things, I think people must just appreciate that this is why we're friends, you and I, okay? Because we share certain experiences. And that's why when we started talking about the detrans experience, I understood it viscerally because because I'd lived something similar. And a lot of people listening to this will have had similar experiences. So when you listen to us talking about these things, it is about lived experience, but there's an objective reality that you and I are now adapting and adapting to. So strength is actually self-actualization. It's not something, this isn't some intellectual concept that we're talking about here. Your strength comes from lived experience, from hard lessons, and it culminates in a kind of meritocracy. So
yeah.
Carry on.
Yeah, absolutely. And related to that, I have queer values deception. It values deception. You're lying to yourself about your sex. You're lying to yourself about your body. You have body dysmorphia. You're lying to other people. If you're saying use these pronouns, I want to use this opposite sex facility, I want to be treated as the opposite sex, you're lying to others. But it values that. And the more that you pass, the higher status you have, the more that you've mutilated yourself, the higher status you have, because the value is deception. The opposite healthy value would, of course, be truth. That's one of my core values, truth in everything. Truth, to accept that I had bad values, or I was valuing the wrong things in the past. Brutal truth. And that's still a hard pill to swallow every day, because when we're valuing strength and truth, that can be very painful. But it's not as painful as when you're lying and you're valuing weakness. So let's just be clear here. There's always going to be pain. The existentialist framework understands that there's always going to be pain, but it's a question of tolerating pain and also pain reduction, if possible, by living a meaningful and balanced life. Another one.
Let me add something. Okay. Now this is good stuff. This is core to the differences between a detransitioner and obviously healthy people in general, and someone that's in transition. And anyone that's what I call pre-trans, people that are ideating and they're in the stage of thinking that this is a good idea, okay, they really need to listen to this stuff, because the outcomes of values is what matters. Okay, and deception is existentially is a complete catastrophe. And we can talk about the studies on families that have deception and lies. It's catastrophic. Okay, so we know this politically. Deception is corruption in politics, and your country, like South Africa, just collapses. So you can see it in any system. Deception is not a successful strategy. I can agree with someone that says, I want to present this way. Okay, I can accept that. Like all of us say this, dress how you want and wear makeup and do whatever you want, but don't take other people's rights from them. And this is obviously why we do these podcasts. But the point being that the outcome of deception is chaos. It's instability, it's unpredictability, it feeds anxiety. It's like mainlining chaos into your blood. Whereas truth, even if it's uncomfortable, the outcomes are stability and predictability. And if you're doing that from childhood, you're building on. It's a compounding effect. It's a cumulative effect. So you get more and more stability and predictability. Your existential anxiety goes down because you haven't been lying. So if someone comes to you and says, think about how we respond when someone comes and says, you lied last week. And you go, no, I didn't. Whereas someone that is lying, they go, oh, which one? It's chaos.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It is a compounding effect. And that's where when you couple all of these values, let me just read the list of ones all together just so people can understand. Queer values compounded together. They value weakness, deception, avoidance, shame, control, and short-term pleasure, versus strong normal values would be strength, truth, accountability, competency, and authority. And purpose is the other one. And I have here pleasure, the opposite of purpose. Because I was thinking like short-term pleasure as a value was something I strongly valued, that whether it be through food, drugs, sleeping, sex, porn, whatever it is. And I was thinking, okay, what is the opposite of this short-term pleasure? Long-term purpose. Because none of those things I was doing were actually bringing a sense of fulfillment. They weren't improving my character in any way. They weren't helping the world in any way. Exactly. It was just self-gratification versus purpose. You're disciplining yourself over a period of time to actually improve something in yourself and others. And so I think this is very important, and I don't want people to dismiss pleasure as the queer value, because the trans ideology is all about pleasure. It's all about what brings you short-term gratification. It's about the high you feel when you inject estrogen or testosterone. It's about the high you feel when you've properly deceived someone that you're the opposite sex. And it's about the high you feel when you're getting some kind of narcissistic satisfaction from getting someone to use your pronouns. When someone's walking on eggshells around you, you're getting this sense of pleasure because you have some kind of power, or people are treating you with special attention, even if it's fake and shallow, or people are only doing it to appease you, or because they don't trust you and they just want to get away from you. In the long term, pleasure in regards to pornography, in regards to masturbation, in regards to deceiving people sexually, and the shallowness of how you're presenting, when the kind of ephemeral nature of youth and beauty. Not that beauty is, I actually think beauty is a good value, but it's the opposite of beauty, which is the short-term hedonic pleasure-seeking beauty, which is a perversion of the healthy value of beauty. So I think sexuality, which is not a bad thing, but in the queer sense, short-term pleasure regarding porn, sexuality, and this facade of a sexually desirable person, which is a deception, I think is a huge queer value. And I think, as we've discussed before, I was looking for a genuine, healthy relationship, love, fulfilling sexual life, which is a healthy value. But the way I was doing it was through short-term gratification and hookups and these really shallow inversions of that health.
Yeah. I made notes.
Yeah, I'm giving you space to speak.
Now, this is, again, I want to just, for the sake of people really getting something useful out of this, you need to understand that I hope someone who's considering trans is listening to this, because you just have to understand that pleasure is being, the irony, a lot of these kids, because obviously usually I'm talking to younger people, but they're very motivated by social justice, okay? But then when I confront them with the idea that erasing someone's identity is not social justice, hedonism is not social justice, consumption, especially on an unfair and unequal basis, $600,000 for medical procedures for someone in America so that she can stand and pee, and then she dies. Coming from South Africa, it's obscene, okay? So I urge people that think they can be trans and have a value of social justice, you're a complete hypocrite. It is obscene. I'm sorry, that's just the only word I can think of. I know this might be a little bit upsetting to some people, but go to South Africa, but go spend 6 months in South Africa and then come back and tell me you want surgery, okay, to make yourself feel better about a confused identity or something. It's just crazy. So also with the pleasure dynamic, this, what we were talking about in the values, the difference between pleasure in the queer values and purpose in the normal values, I would say detrans values, actually. You should change that list, because I promise you, this is why I love this work that I do, because detransitioners have leaped ahead. They're not all thriving, that's not what I'm saying, okay? But in terms of understanding these things, they get it. Trust me. I don't have to convince them of why values are important. They know. And that's the assessment I do with every single one of them that comes into the group, is a values assessment, so that I can check that their values are in the right place. So they might not have exactly the beliefs that are compatible with everybody in the group, but I want to know that their values are in the right place. So the purpose, the difference between, kind of existentially, between pleasure and purpose. Pleasure is consumption. Pleasure to me is anti-social justice. And then there's this interesting thing that I've been toying with lately. Pleasure is indulgence, okay? And like in the modern world, we talk about, I'm going to go relax, okay? But relaxing is I should really look into the actual history, the linguistic history of the word relax, because I'm pretty sure it came in the Industrial Revolution, because people in Africa don't relax. What they do is they either rejuvenate or they're working. They're looking after their kids. They're working so they can feed their kids. They're driving, and I'm saying Africa just because that's where I come from. I'm saying in most of the world, okay? So the distinction I want to make is you've got this consumer-based, hedonistic, indulgent, relax is fitting in there paradigm, okay? You've got two different paradigms. And then on the other hand, you've got someone who understands existentially that they need to do stuff, that they need to find their skills and contribute to their society and be productive and not consume more than they deliver, okay? It's a very important thing. So when they talk about social justice, often I find they don't actually understand that. If you're consuming more than you deliver, you're taking more than you've earned. Like, that's literally what you're doing. Instead, what we should be talking about is rejuvenating the soul and resting the body, okay? And we were talking about this the other night, about people's sleep patterns. We don't have to go into it now, but this is the two different paradigms that we're talking about. Is the modern world says you can indulge yourself, you can relax, okay? But now if you're relaxing, existentially we understand this. If you're relaxing and you haven't earned that, you're actually generating guilt. And then what the mind does, what the brain does, is it says, oh, I need an excuse for why I have this like uneasy feeling. The excuse is, oh, I have a disability. Problem solved. Go ahead.
Wow, sir, that was well put. Yeah, I can't argue with any of that. Absolutely. I think we've all kind of seen those memes and can relate to that idea, like, oh, I'm just going to relax. And then you try to relax, and then you're like, wait a second, I feel guilty about all the things I've done. And then you spend an hour lying there on the phone, and you're like, oh, just trying to avoid all the things. You're trying to distract from the fact that you're avoiding all those other things you should be doing. Everyone can relate to that, but especially when you're avoiding something as strong as growing up as your own sex. And we've discussed before, I think it's worth mentioning again the reproductive avoidance, that when you're avoiding something as strong as you're jerking off, to put it bluntly, and you're watching porn and you're not putting any thought into the purpose of that energy and how in most cultures it's being directed into a productive family generating environment, and you're avoiding your reproductive capacity, or even with queer pro-social
it's all
capacity.
pro-social.
And you're with queer, again, the queer value of disabling yourself and being weak and avoiding your own power, your own potential to reproduce. When you're avoiding something as fundamental as your own sex, how are you ever supposed to relax? And I want to make it very clear that what people label as gender dysphoria is often just existential anxiety. What people label as a lot of different conditions. Yes, Vincent, I know you're happy. What people label as a lot of conditions are actually just existential anxiety. And you can say, oh, my gender dysphoria is so bad today because of I didn't get validated, or I know I'm sounding dismissive to people, and I don't mean to mock this. I'm mocking myself in the past because I lived through this. I'm absolutely coming from a personal place of angst where I was suicidal for many years. In the past, I was like, oh, my dysphoria is so bad. And when we look at the linguistic of what dysphoria means, it just means discomfort. Okay, I'm having discomfort. Imagine that as a human being. Oh, I'm having discomfort. And then you're like, oh, but it's because of my genitalia. It's because of my genitalia. I don't know.
No, it's not.
I don't know about that. Sorry, I'm trying to give this credit, but it's just so stupid.
Once you see it, it's one of those things. Once you see it, I mean, I had a session this week with adorable young trans ideating person. When I say adorable, she's actually super charming, super intelligent, intuitive is the word I'm looking for. She's actually really intuitive for someone so young. And I gave her in one session, I gave her 3 different sources of dysphoria, okay, because I had anorexia. I know what dysphoria is, okay? And she's looking everywhere for these explanations, okay? And she's beginning with her mother, all right? And she's saying, I'm dysphoric because of my mother. I'm dysphoric because she has a chronic illness as well. That's always a big problem. They're going to blame the body. And then it becomes a sixth thing because they're blaming one of the parents, okay? Which is natural. We all at some point go, oh, I'm like this because of my parents, okay? We all do it. Like, guys, it's normal. The point being that you need to go and find yourself. You need that thing that I posted the other day. If you interrogate your body, it'll reply with pain. If you interrogate the world, the universe, she replies with love. And I simplified it as much as I could because I want people to understand that you need to interrogate the world. When you understand that, you realize you need your body to do that. So it's about interrogating the universe, about what is out there, what are the potentials out there, who are all these people that populate the world, which ones do I get along with, which ones don't I get along with. That's what you should be doing. As soon as you invert it, the body will punish you. It will cause you pain. It's going to defend itself, all right? So this against you. And this comes from like the internal family systems theory. That we need to understand that we are actually parts. We are different parts. And when you accept that, actually, yes, it's true, but it's okay. You don't have to cut a part out. It's about accepting that and understanding that. And when you do, then you see, now I'm going to be in synchronicity and harmony with these different parts, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to interrogate the world. I just want to catch something else as well. I don't know if we said this in the last thing, but some of what we're talking about right now is about the functions that you said you need to understand your sex-based responsibility. So like women, I know not all women will create life, but women can create life and men create stuff. And someone that's trans ideating needs to understand that's not something you can switch off. So you might not actually create life if you're a woman, but the fact is you have that capacity. And that means you need to go out into the world and kind of nurture. That's your role in society. I'm not saying that women, please, if someone's listening and they're jumping to conclusions, I'm not saying that women can't create other stuff. Okay, they can't be engineers and they can't be builders and whatever. But generally speaking, women have that capacity and men don't. And trust me, when you talk to detrans males, it's an anxiety that males have. They'll tell you. Because as I say, the detransitioners have been to the abyss, they've faced the shadow and they've come back. Whereas the rest of us, a lot of men, they never go near the abyss. They spend all their time trying to get away from that. There's a shame at being born without the capacity to create life. Okay? In men. This might sound very weird to people.
It's like womb envy, basically.
Exactly.
It's very like penis envy and womb envy.
Exactly. And
people don't like Freud, but
yeah, I know. One of my detransitioners in the detrans video we did, Defined Uniquely, he's on Twitter. I interviewed him for that because he was in the group and he had some stuff he wanted to say. And he pointed out how he thinks it gets distorted into porn. That's why men watch so much porn. Okay, so that's his theory. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with that, but it was very interesting. When he said it, I was like, wow, okay, hold on. But then on the other hand, men don't understand, young men don't understand that they do have these capacities. They just lack the competencies. Whereas women, becoming a good mother obviously is a competency, but you're born with this innate power. Whereas men need to go out and if they don't exercise their natural creative power, they'll never know that they have it. So for men, it's a competency-based problem. And then just the last thing, just want to point out, we were talking about hedonism and consumption, and you need to understand that when you move away from mere consumption, relaxing consumption, hedonism, putting all this energy into presenting one way or the other, you're moving away from an exchange-based relationship with the world. Okay, so that's a paradigm shift, and you're going into what ultimately is nihilism, you know. So if you shift away, if you go more into consumption, you spend all your time consuming, and you're not actually creating and exchanging. So I just want to reiterate that word, because exchanging is about allowing energy and libido and ideas and support and all these things to exchange between people, like you and I are doing right now, and everyone listening to this is doing right now. An exchange creates something. It's a synthesis, and it creates something new. Even though a lot of these things other people have said in other podcasts, inevitably something new will come from this particular podcast. So we're in a process of exchanging and creating. And okay, then there's people that will consume this, but hopefully it's consumption for the purpose of creating something else. So this is still a creative process.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just want to point that out, yeah. But carry on with because this values list is brilliant.
Yeah. So another one I have on here is the queer value of control. Queerness, queer theory, values, control. It's trying to manage everything that another person is thinking, doing, saying, right? It's authoritarian. You're policing someone's thoughts, the words that they're speaking, the physical reactions that they have, right? I used to, again, be completely guilty of this, right? I believed the queer theory that said that if a gay man wasn't attracted to me as a female who was identifying as a gay man, that was transphobic and that was unacceptable. So even just this uncontrollable physiological reactions that we have of sexual attraction or desire to be with a person or whatever, that's a form of control versus, and also I should say, trying to control nature itself. Again, from the existentialist perspective, this is very old stuff that human beings are trying to control nature. I think existentialism accepts that we can't control nature. We cannot get nature to submit to our will, nature being death and life itself. And maybe you call that God or whatever, but existence being alive, we can't control death. And trying to control that or feeling completely paralyzed in awe of the universe. And so either way, disrespecting nature. I think the existentialist lens works in harmony with nature to accept nature's creative limitations. We have a life, we can do certain things with it. We die, we can't control that. We have a body, we can do certain things with it. It breaks down and falls apart. It has its limitations. Like as a female, my body has limitations. I didn't like that as a highly creative person who really felt powerless and helpless in my life from childhood abuse. And also just a stubbornness. I was stubborn against reality, which is why I now value truth, because it's less painful to just accept reality. But I felt angry and resentful at nature and at my own body for just having the constraint. And again, it can be simplified by penis envy in some sense. I was just like, the grass is greener on the other side. I'm like, I really want to have a male body and a male experience, whatever the hell my fantasy was of what that is, which can be obviously the same thing that the trans identified males fantasize about, that the female experience, that they think
It's
I'm
so
having a much
wonderful.
better
Yeah.
experience. Yeah, I gotta say, it's not that great, guys. But
And it's not that great being a guy either.
yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
once you detransition, you realize that it's better to just work within the creative constraints of the body. So there's an existential control, there's a political control, and a personal control, as well as obviously pharmaceutical attempts at control, because you're literally contorting the body into this mutant thing versus a healthy value would be authority. So I juxtapose these because if you're valuing having authority, what does that mean? I feel like we hear the word authority and that sounds like someone's going to infringe
Scary.
on something. It sounds scary. It sounds like there's someone in charge and there's someone who has more power. But the truth is, authority does use power, but power isn't a negative thing. Power is a neutral force that we could use for good or evil. And so if we're let's say maybe we could use the synonym commanding, right? If we're trying to control, that's not the same as commanding. If we're commanding something, think about a parent, or think about even like the leader of a fleet of Navy ships or something. Like the difference between you're trying to control your kids, or you're trying to control your partner, or control a bunch of Navy men or whatever, versus commanding, right? That's why they call it commander, because you're actually commanding because you have found a way to utilize your power and authority naturally in a way that inspires and motivates people, instead of authoritarianly demanding or controlling them or attempting to control. So I think this is something people don't want to hear, as if they wanted to hear any of the other stuff. But I don't think they want to hear this about control versus authority, because a lot of parents that I've worked with, they have maybe a tendency to lack some authority. And so they feel like they're trying to control everything. A lot of these parents are very smart, very resourceful. A lot of the mothers, they're researching everything and they're trying to get into their kids' heads any way possible to help them come back to reality. Or a trans identified person who's obsessing in an OCD capacity about trying to control how everyone's perceiving them and the microaggressions. And I think that's very hard for people to hear. That's actually not strength. That's actually not using your power. That's actually draining your power and outsourcing it to whoever is around. As a parent, you might be outsourcing your power to the cult or to your own kid, and you're not realizing that your energy is not one of commanding authority of someone that your kid should respect or look up to, but someone who isn't actually in control. By trying so hard to control something, it shows you're not in control. So I'm sure you have thoughts about that.
I do. Beautiful. That was wonderful. Just if I can just reflect for a second, having insight is what is lacking in this whole arena. When you talk to kids that are ideating, there is no insight. And when you talk to detransitioners, it's 90% insight. And just to go back to what you were saying, this is the difference between authoritarian and authoritative. So in parenting styles, guys, this has been proven like repeatedly. Authoritarian is more what we think of like tyranny. Okay, and it's exactly what you said. It implies that you don't really have control. But authoritative is basically, it comes from a position of confidence, is, look, I'm telling you this is the way to do it because it works. So I have a sense, I have a self-confidence that this works, and let me explain how it works. Okay, that's, I don't know if you've noticed this with some of these people. It's often what the parents, Gen X, I think in general, and the boomers as well, they've stopped doing that for some reason. And I think it's because they came from a different society, but we live in a pretty complex society. And when you can Google these things, the kid is already going, but why? Far more than any kid did before. And all kids did that forever. But now they can go on and they can read 5 journal articles on the topic in an hour. So you need to understand as a parent and by the way, as a grandparent as well, if there's any listening, that you can speak authoritatively, partly because you have succeeded, you're still alive, and you're 50 years old or 60 years old or whatever it is. That's evidence of success, okay? So you can speak authoritatively, but if you say, Laura, don't do that, and you don't say anything else, that's authoritarian, okay? So if you switch the tone and you add detail, let me tell you why you shouldn't do that, okay? And with these kids, the kids that are trans-ideating, you need to be really blunt and overt, and Laura's nodding because you're on the spectrum as well. So you know exactly what I mean. You can't just say, hey, Laura, make sure you go to bed at 12 o'clock at night. You have to say, let me spend an hour telling you why this one thing. And then when they see, wow, this person actually knows what they're talking about. Because you know what? The trans people look like they know what they're talking about because they've got this whole repertoire laid out. Okay, when you do this, then that will happen. Then when you do that, this will happen. And all it is really, it's a mimicry of a system, of a complex system. What you've got to do is you've got to replace that complex system with one that actually makes sense, that has meaningful outcomes. That's really, really important. So I just want to just emphasize this. All these other parenting styles, we spoke about it in the last recording that you and I did last week. The permissive parenting style is disastrous. It's disastrous. And unfortunately, guys, I know some parents aren't going to want to hear this, but the truth is, you're doing it to make yourself feel good, okay, which I understand. I understand that. No one's perfect, but you have a role, you have a responsibility to create a person that is individuated. That I'm going to stop there because there's other things I could add, but actually, on a society level, that's it. Individuated means they've got some agency, they've taken responsibility, and they can go out into the world and start pursuing their own goals. That's an individuated person. What you don't want is someone that's constantly dependent on you because it's either you've been telling them what to do their whole lives, or they've been constantly reacting to you their whole lives. So this is the problem with the trans thing, and that's why we all say, don't confront them directly about the trans thing, because all you're going to do is you're going to create the object of their rebellion. You become the object of their rebellion. That's why whatever you say, they go and they do the opposite. You've got to come in more authoritative with reason and logic and be complex about it, because otherwise you won't satisfy the intelligence that they are trying to apply to the world. And by the way, parents, this can start happening from 13, eh? This isn't something you must wait until they're 18. You've got to just start doing it early. Carry on, Laura.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I that's, and with authoritativeness as well, again, like with I'm trying to think, gather my thoughts here. The trans influencers are mimicking competency, they're mimicking authoritativeness, they're mimicking that. And I think a lot of times things happen in life, right? And we all have health issues and circumstance and stress. But I think a lot of the trans identified kids are more vulnerable to finding an outside influence to be inspired by as a model of what they want their life to be when the parent is not at their best. So if the parent has a health issue or the parent is just distracted with work, it doesn't even need to be severe. It's very much as simple as the parent isn't showing up and modeling to that child that their life is good as an adult woman or as an adult man. And especially in a marriage, I talk to a lot of parents, and my parents' marriages, they should have gotten divorced. I'm not joking at all, but they did not. So a lot of parents will say that there's a lot of tension between the husband and wife, and the kids are picking up on all that. And a lot of times there's a dynamic where one parent is very involved, very controlling, and whether that be permissive or authoritative or authoritarian, but that one parent is doing everything. And then so the child is over identifying with that parent, and then they're going to individuate stronger from that parent, while the other parent is more absent, whether they be permissive or just not present at all. And that can be felt in the marriage too. So if you're not modeling a healthy, engaged, loving, honest, authentic, and enjoyable seeming marriage, why is your kid going to want to grow up to be a man or a woman? Why is your kid going to want to grow up to be a husband or wife?
Exactly.
Because they're going to look at that model that they have and think that for whatever reason that doesn't align with them, or that seems unhealthy. Maybe it really is unhealthy. They're going to look at that, and then they're going to look at this trans influencer who is performing. They're performing healthiness. They're performing,
Joy.
right? Because it's what they're making, like a 5-minute or less video on TikTok, and they're saying, "Oh, I was suicidal. Here's a photo of me, of how suicidal I was for like 30 seconds. And here's a montage of photos of me now, and I'm so great now." They're going to see this false premise, and they're going to latch on to that because they don't resonate with the models that they have from the mother and the father. And again, this can be for simple reasons. It doesn't need to be actually abusive or neglectful the way it was with my parents. It could just be as simple as the parents are dealing with a life situation, like they're just busy at work, or maybe the parent just didn't realize that their child was this sensitive, was this intelligent, and they thought everything was fine. And then out of the blue, quote unquote, their kid comes out as trans. Usually, if you look back, what was going on for a year or two, that kid was individuating in a hyper intellectual environment online because that hyper intellectual need wasn't being met from the parent.
Yeah.
And now they're living in this fantasy world, and the parent maybe just didn't understand, number one, that their kid specifically is very cerebral and needs things explained in detail. I will say anecdotally, for me, I often joke that for me, I'm such a divergent thinker, and I think so complexly that it will take me an extreme roundabout way of complex existential archetypes and symbols and ideas to come back to the most fundamental thing, like you should sleep at a certain time, or you shouldn't eat mac and cheese all the
What do the philosophers say about dinner?
What do they say about mac and cheese? It took me, I'll say this, like, if people don't know, like, it took me getting like hardcore into Jordan Peterson, of all people, to help explain to me the simplest concepts. And that's a critique of people like Jordan, where they're like, oh, he's not saying anything deep or profound. He's saying the most common truths that we know, and a lot of people don't actually know them because it's going in one ear and out the other, because it's not being explained to them in a way, in a framework that they understand, because they're thinking in so many questions, and all those questions need to be divergently explained. As I'm coming back to my point here, divergently. But yeah, so you got to check your marriage. I don't know how else to say. That's very blunt, but you got to check the models that you're having in your own relationship to your own body. My mother was overweight for most of her life. The marriage was terrible. And there's the how can you respect someone in terms of bodily integrity if you're not even healthy yourself? And even if it wasn't the trans issue, it's like with anything. Like, the kids are going to pick up and mimic whatever habits the parents are doing. And then once they get old enough, then they're going to reject a lot of the stuff the parents were doing, but they're not going to know why or what they're rejecting. They're just going to be rebelling and then finding these other influences. So back to the list of queer values, shame. And now it sounds, who would value shame? And this is very much related to the weakness. And dysphoria, again, is this sense of shame. People are wallowing in shame. They're wallowing in the fact that they don't feel good enough. They're wallowing in the fact they're not masculine or feminine enough, or they're not passing enough, or that people are too transphobic. So queerness values shame. And those that promote queerness, they want people to feel ashamed because they want to be able to manipulate them, because people who feel ashamed can easily be bought and sold to do whatever the person wants. The opposite of shame, a healthy value, is competency. We have spoken a lot about competency, that competency is the opposite of shame. And shame, I believe, is at the root of most of gender dysphoria. For some reason, you're feeling fundamentally bad about something about yourself, how people perceive you in the world, and about your own body and your attractiveness and your strength, and all these different other values, I think, can come back to shame at the core. And so the opposite of shame is competency. I'm not going to feel like, let's say I'm a music producer. So if I feel ashamed that my music isn't very good or being heard, and I'm wallowing in that, I'm going to stay stuck not doing anything about that and just being like, oh, I'm not good enough in this song and blah, blah, blah. But the opposite of that would be competency, me figuring out strategies and actually implementing behaviors that will get more people to hear my music, or practicing the skill of music production more until it's a song that I'm really proud of and genuinely can respect. Shame, the opposite of that, maybe could be self-respect. And the truth is, you're not going to have self-respect. You can try to have unconditional positive regard for yourself, and I would recommend doing that. It's not easy because it helps to foster respect, but you're going to feel ashamed no matter how much self-love work you do, unless you have competency, because you need to respect yourself. Because as we were saying, if you're resting and treat yourself, girl, and all that kind of stuff, like if you're doing that without having earned it, you're going to feel ashamed. I know that if I'm on a weight loss plan or whatever, and I've been really good about exercising, and I know that I've done well for the day, and then I eat some Cheez-Its or whatever, and I'm saying this is a real life example of what happened 2 days ago, and I eat some Cheez-Its, I'm like, you know what? It's okay. I have earned this because I've done the work and I feel competent at my long-term goal of losing weight. But if I was just eating those Cheez-Its and I know that I'm not exercising and I'm not eating healthy, I'm going to feel guilt, and then I'm going to feel shame about who I am as a human being. So,
and then you'll see, whether you do it deliberately or not, your mind is looking for a solution to that. Because your mind, we need to understand, that's what I said earlier about these different parts of ourselves. There's a part of us that's constantly working on problems, whether you're conscious of it or not. And existentialism, I think, helps explain this sort of intuitively a bit better, I think, because it says there's this thing that's constantly monitoring whether you're living your life meaningfully or not. Okay, because we say on the other end is this unlived life, and the mindless consumption, like eating Cheez-Its, even though you've done nothing, you're just eating Cheez-Its, is behaviorally is living the unlived life. You're consuming calories for what?
For nothing.
What? For nothing.
That's a good question to ask sometimes.
Yeah.
And one that I'll just be honest here, because I think it's useful. That's a specific thing that I've recently been realizing. Oh, I've been avoiding the fact that I'm overeating. And I'm giving myself some forgiveness. I'm overeating because I've been through a lot of crazy shit. But that's still not an excuse, because I've been through a lot of crazy shit, and I know that I can cope better in other ways because I already have done that for many years now. So this is something that's a continuous process throughout our life. And as more circumstances come in, we have to adapt to them. When I become a wife and a mother, I'm going to have to examine things then. This doesn't stop, and it's not just going to happen in emerging adulthood or adolescence. But that's the first time that people really encounter that, because they're pushing up against the real world, and they're pushing up against the potential of what could be. Because like when you think of someone who's an adult ranges from 18 to 100. And those are some very different stages of life, and they're all different forms of adult. That's why emerging adult was so helpful to me as a framework, because I'm like, okay, I'm over 18, I'm not a kid, but I'm not an adult. That's not something I relate to. And then after about 2 or so years of very intense daily work, therapy, all these types of things, I was able to say, yes, I am an adult. So it doesn't actually take that much time to develop. It's about what you do within that time that really counts. I think that's a good sort of existential lesson.
Absolutely. Yeah. There was that one value, avoidance and accountability. Are you going to talk about that?
Yeah. So the other one I had was avoidance. And again, I believe that trans is avoidance. It's full-time avoidance. Like, it was just Halloween here in the United States. And I'm thinking, like, for a trans person, every day is Halloween. And I know that's mean, but every day you're putting on a costume of someone that doesn't exist. And it's not the same as, again, someone wearing certain clothes or being a drag queen or whatever. You're fundamentally lying to the world about your sex and about your past too. Avoidance. And trans people do everything they can to avoid reality and avoid themselves, avoid their past. They're like, that's my dead name. I was talking to a mom today. It was heartbreaking. She was telling me, and this was in person, telling me my son has burned baby photos of himself because he doesn't think that person should exist anymore. And I was like, I'm getting pissed off on your behalf at your son right now. That's just so cruel.
Vicious.
It's just vicious, and it's vicious to the family. It's vicious to the person themselves, because that's an innocent child that you're just throwing away. That's a part of you that grew up into who you are today. You wouldn't be yourself without that person. Self-compassion is hugely lacking, and there's an avoidance of self-compassion. And of course, all these activists and the queer theorists will say that this is all about compassion. It's not. It's not compassionate to lie to someone. It's not compassionate to weaken someone's body and mind and shame them and say that shame is actually fundamental. Because what the queer will say is, you know, you can't be trans without having dysphoria, or the fact that you hate yourself is proof that you're trans. Like, what a horrible sentiment.
Everything's proof. How
Yeah,
convenient.
everything is proof.
Everything is proof. I love serendipity, right?
Yeah, I do.
There's a picture that you and I have actually talked about, I think privately. The picture that I put up on my cupboard, that was me reaching out to myself when I was a kid.
And and then I put up a photo of myself as a kid. You were the reason I did that. I
kept seeing it. So that's me. So this is the picture, just for everyone to understand. I stuck this up. I don't know why, but just after I stopped being anorexic, I started putting this up on my cupboard. Every time I moved, I would put it up on the outside of my cupboard. I would put it up with a bunch of other things. My friends used to say to me, why do you keep putting that picture up? And I was like, I don't know, it's cute. Years later, about 3 years later, I had this complete, so I was about 28, emerging adult, right?
I know.
I had this total meltdown where a girlfriend broke up with me, and I was, what is wrong with me? Why are good people breaking up with me? I'm obviously not who I thought I was. So I looked in the mirror, and guys, you need to do this. You need to look at the mirror, look at yourselves in the eyes and go, who am I? Don't look at your body and go, who am I? You need to look into your eyes, because I tell you, just doing it in the bathroom, it's bizarre. It can get quite weird, because you suddenly realize, oh, there's eons of person inside you. There's all these experiences. And you know what I can say today? I am this guy. I can say that now. I can say I became, because you know why? Because this photo was taken before everything went wrong in my life and I started reacting to everyone else's dysfunction. Okay, because I grew up with a lot of dysfunction as well. When I saw this picture on that day when I was 28 and I looked in the mirror and I said, like, who are you actually? It just so happened that I went out to get dressed for work and there was this picture and I was like, it was almost like he became alive and he was like, take my hand. You know, so I urge you, I do this with a lot of my clients, depends on what they're talking to me about. Get a picture of yourself from a time when you felt you were really yourself. It might be as young as this. I mean, I'm obviously very young here, but it was just after that all hell broke loose in my life. And put it up somewhere to remind yourself that the journey of you said emerging adulthood, okay? You know, psychologically and philosophically, the journey of going into adulthood is about becoming who you are, but nobody knows who you are. Trans people don't know who you are. Your parents don't know who you are. Nobody knows who you are. You need to go and find who you are by interacting with the world. You don't sit at home, go online and ask a bunch of weirdos online, who am I? Okay, go and look in the mirror. Put up a picture of yourself as a baby and say, am I that person? So when they take that and they burn these pictures, okay, they're erasing who they could be, who they would be, who they should be. And existentially, it's catastrophic. So I would urge parents that are listening to this, because I'm sure some of them will be dealing with kids that are trans ideating, go and make copies of those photos now. Because if the child gets this into their head, because this is how cult works, it seeks to erase your identity so that you become dependent on their identity. Go and make copies of those pictures, hide them away, I've got a family who the child actually went in and found the photo albums that the mother had hidden away and got rid of those as well. It's vicious. And talking about guilt and shame, when this person gets older, they're going to realize how being an adult is quite difficult. And if you've created life, you've actually produced a child out of your union between husband and wife, and this thing, it erases everything you've done. It's a visceral psychic wound. So the child is then going to carry that guilt. Instead, if you're sneaky about it, and when they go, I'm really sorry I did that, and you go, oh, don't worry, I've got copies, you could undo a lot of their guilt. Mm-hmm. And I just want to emphasize, before we stop, I just want to emphasize what you said about the relationship. I feel like if you've had kids, you've got a responsibility, you made a commitment to these kids. Some marriages should actually end. It's not good to continue this unhealthy environment. But on the other hand, the parents are also subject to this very narcissistic culture, this cluster B culture that we're creating. The parents are often consuming too much themselves, okay? If we just begin with digital habits, device management and that kind of thing, the kids are seeing you do that. And when you're like sitting there zoned out, looking at Twitter for hours and hours, you're telling them, this is your future, you might as well do what I'm doing and learn how to manage it, okay? Guys, that's really not your future. All right. I mean, we all spend too much time online. I'm just as guilty as anybody else, but I have lots of what I call Odyssean strategies, the block your ears and sail through the straits instead of listening to the siren song that's telling you, come and play with my device. As soon as you are not directing your behavior, the way I use Twitter, for example, is I'll engage with you and with other people. I'll engage directly. I'll check up on certain updates and then I get off. Okay, because there's a time when you become subject to the algorithm. And that's when all the designers sitting in the design studio of all these social media profiles, that's when they take control of your life and you start generating existential guilt. And that becomes anxiety. And people come to me and they go, I've got so much anxiety and I don't know why. And I'm like, how much time do you spend online? How much sleep do you get? How often do you actually rest? Like genuine rest? Which is sleep, by the way. Rest and sleep is the same thing. A lot of people don't understand this.
Sleep at night.
At night, yes. Just yesterday, by the way, did a little bit of digging into one of my clients. This kid sleeps 2 hours every day after school. And the parents don't think this is a problem. I'm like, guys, that is catastrophic. We don't have time now to get into why, but trust me, it is very bad if your child is sleeping 2 hours during the day. A nap during the day, if it's necessary, should be 20 minutes. That's been studied. This has been researched. They've measured it. As soon as you go over 20 minutes, your brain waves change. And he's like a zombie after that. I'm like, you think it's because his brain waves have changed. So guys, this is why sometimes you have to reach out to a professional, because we study these things. I spent thousands of hours reading research papers, and even now, in between my clients, I book off time to read more stuff and stay up to date with the research and all that stuff. So sometimes you have to talk to a professional. I'm confident that what you do with your clients, you do within your scope. We talk about scope of what is my lived experience. This is what I can tell you, but you're not going to stray into, because we've spoken about it before, you're not going to stray into stuff that you don't actually know about. A professional can talk about the actual, the meaningful stuff, the change stuff. It's more technical stuff, I'd say. And then someone like me, if I can brag a little bit, my attitude is more motivational. So that's why I sometimes call myself more a coach than a counselor, because therapists are getting a bad rap lately. And I think we must just distinguish between what people are doing. But I'm giving a little bit of summary because we should stop just now. So is there anything else you wanted to say?
I feel like we have much more to discuss on this topic, because we spent the whole time talking about values, which is amazing, but there's still so many other notes that I have. So we will definitely do
another one in a few weeks.
Do another talk, but I'm really glad we could just go through those one by one.
That was great. Yeah.
Clear values and the real values.
It's so nice for me, I must tell you. It's so nice for me to sit and listen to someone explain values like the way that I know makes sense, because it's usually me doing all that work. And guys, really, I want to emphasize if you don't understand or you don't know your values, you actually don't know what you're doing. It's trying to drive without your GPS on. You don't know what you're doing. So I urge people, again, like, you can do a lot of this stuff on your own. You don't have to go and see a professional, but it's the foundation of your daily choices and decisions. And if you don't know what they are, you basically don't have a roadmap to where you want to go. You're just on a road. And then if you think about it, if you're just on the road, I'm going to pop up at the corner and go, hey, why don't you come this way? Spend 2 hours on Twitter. And then as soon as you get there, there's Facebook going, why don't you come this way? And then people say, oh, I don't know why I've got so much anxiety. Should we stop?
Yes, let's stop. And guys, thanks for watching and listening, and check out the other videos that are coming up on the screen now. And me and Vincent will have much more to say. So
We will.
Stay tuned for that. Thank you.